address for my class presentation is about those who identify as non-binary, therefore falling outside the gender binary. Non-binary people continue to defy and break outside of gender roles and expectations simply by existing as themselves. It's important in our concept of gender to not only deconstruct the gender binary, but also to understand it and the restrictions this binary holds on cisgender and non-cisgender people alike. After addressing this topic, we'll also take a look at some examples of how non-binary people in particular break outside the gender binary. A little about myself and my experience with the gender binary. As I said before, I'm Liv. I identify as non-binary and I use she, they pronouns. I came out as non-binary about 5 years ago, and my knowledge of the non-binary identity is constantly expanding and growing as I learn more and listen to other members of my community. I also do quite a bit of community mutual aid work with a group focused on giving back to non-binary and trans individuals, especially those who are people of color. Through the experiences I've been granted as a result of working with them, I've been able to learn even more about others' experience with the non-binary identity and continue to deepen my understanding of the individualization of the non-binary experience. To touch briefly on gender, gender is different from sex, which refers to the different biological and physiological characteristics of females, males, and intersex persons, such as chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. Gender refers to the characteristics of women and men that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a certain gender, as well as relationships with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. Gender is hierarchical and produces inequalities that intersect with other social and economic inequalities. Gender-based discrimination intersects with other factors of discrimination, such as ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability, age, geographic location, gender identity, and sexual orientation, among others. Gender identity refers to a person's internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond to the person's physiology or designated sex at birth. Gender identity is one's own internal experience and perception of self. So the gender binary is essentially the idea that there are two genders, man and woman, and that they are distinct and opposite from each other. Where women are soft, men are tough, women are submissive, and men are dominant, etc. This term, gender binary, describes the system in which a society categorizes its members into one of two sets of gender roles, gender identities, and attributes based on the type of genitalia they have or sex they were born. It's often believed that this binary system of gender was enforced as a means of protecting patriarchal norms at a time when it was expected that women be lesser than men. Along with using the gender binary to categorize human bodies, cultures that obey this binary may also use it to label things, places, and ideas. For example, people identify playing sports as a masculine activity and shopping as a feminine activity. Blue is a color for boys, while pink is for girls. Care work, such as working as a nurse, is a feminine profession, while management or being a CEO is associated with masculinity, and there are plenty of other examples. The use of the gender binary may create institutionalized structures of power, and individuals who identify outside traditional gender binaries, such as non-binary people, may experience discrimination and harassment. Many individuals, especially those who identify as being non-binary, experience being at the bottom of the hierarchy. Cisnormativity is a product of the gender binary that assumes people are cisgender, meaning that their gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. This leads to individuals outside the gender binary experiencing disparities in health and violence at individual, interpersonal, and institutional levels due to their identification. To understand non-binary, first let me quickly define what cisgender is. A person who is cis or cisgender is a person whose sense of personal identity and gender corresponds with their birth sex. As opposed to this, someone who is non-binary, or as it is often referred to, genderqueer, falls under the umbrella of a gender identity that is not solely male or female, an identity that is outside the gender binary. Non-binary identities fall under the transgender umbrella, since non-binary people typically identify with a gender that is different from their assigned sex, although some non-binary people do not consider themselves to be transgender. Being non-binary is not a third gender. The nature of this identity is it's existing outside of any kind of gender binary, so everyone who identifies as non-binary has a completely different experience with their gender identity. In very simple terms, A non-binary person is someone who does not identify as exclusively a man or a woman. Someone who is non-binary might feel like a mix of genders or like they have no gender at all. Some people don't neatly fit into the categories of man or woman or male or female. For example, some people have a gender that blends elements of being a man or woman, or a gender that is different than either male or female. Some people don't identify with any gender. Some people's gender changes over time. People whose gender is not male or female use many different terms to describe themselves, with non-binary being the most common one. Other terms include genderqueer, agender, bigender, and more. None of these terms mean exactly the same thing, but all speak to an experience of gender that is not just male or female. A few things to keep in mind are, non-binary people are nothing new. Non-binary people are not confused about their gender identity or following a new trend. Non-binary identities have been recognized for a long time by cultures and societies around the world. Some, but not all, non-binary people undergo medical procedures to make their bodies more congruent with their gender identity. While not all non-binary people need medical care to live a fulfilling life, it is critical for many. Non-binary people deserve your respect. Ask their pronouns and respect their identity, even if you don't think they look like what their identity is. Personally, I myself identify outside of the gender binary entirely. I'm not a boy or a girl at all. Some other non-binary people might identify partially with one or more of the binary genders. For example, a gender-fluid person, someone whose gender changes over time, could identify as a girl sometimes and genderless other times. There are so many ways to be non-binary, and there's no wrong way to do it. Gender roles in society are how we're expected to act, speak, dress, groom, and conduct ourselves based on our assigned sex. Traditional gender roles are influenced by the media, religion, mainstream education, political systems, cultural systems, and social systems. For example, girls and women are generally expected to dress in typically feminine ways and be polite, accommodating, and nurturing. Men are generally expected to be strong, aggressive, and bold. Every society, ethnic group, and culture has gender role expectations, but they can be very different from group to group. They can also change in the same society over time. For example, pink used to be considered a masculine color in the US, while blue was considered feminine, and now it is completely opposite. A stereotype is a widely accepted judgment or bias about a person or group, even though it's overly simplified and not always accurate. Stereotypes about gender can cause unequal and unfair treatment because of a person's gender, also known as sexism. For example, women are often expected to be accommodating and emotional, while men are usually expected to be self-confident and aggressive. It's also expected that women will take care of the children, cook and clean the home, while men take care of finances, work on the car, and do the home repairs. Some people are quick to assume that teachers and nurses are women, and that pilots, doctors, and engineers are men. Lastly, women are expected to be thin and graceful, while men are expected to be tall and muscular. Men and women are also expected to dress and groom in ways that are stereotypical to their gender. Extreme gender stereotypes are harmful because they don't allow people to fully express themselves and their emotions. For example, it's harmful to masculine people to feel that they're not allowed to cry or express sensitive emotions. And it's harmful to feminine people to feel that they're not allowed to be independent, smart, or assertive. Breaking down gender stereotypes allows everyone to be their best, most authentic selves. The attached video here is a brief description and example of some gender roles and stereotypes in our society. I'm not going to play it during my presentation because it would just take up too much time, but I will include the YouTube links for all the YouTube videos that I'm sharing. Restrictions of the gender binary. The gender binary restricts both cisgender and non-binary people alike. The gender binary damages mental and physical health, promotes economic inequality, and fuels sexual and other gendered violence. The gender binary falsely assumes that gender and sexuality can be neatly divided into two categories, male and female, and polices people's expression and behavior based on their sex at birth. This binary system is an artifact of an outdated understanding of the human body. Merging sex and gender as one and the same leads to barriers in identity and self-expression. To deny this opportunity for self-identification is to stifle the emotional growth and stability of that individual. A binary world perpetuated by the gender binary normalizes an identity division. According to this binary, you're either a man or a woman, and those two are opposites of one another. So as either gender, you are restricted in what you can do. During childhood, you are typically assumed to be the gender that matches your sex, assigned at birth. You're then exposed to things stereotypically associated with that gender. Boys get trucks, girls get dolls. Because this is the standard, we have special names for those who branch out and find alternative interests as kids, and these kids often get bullied as a result. Even for those who remain within the gender binary, those who identify with the gender that corresponds with their sex assigned at birth, this binary still affects them negatively. They're cornered into conformity and forced to wear what others expect of them and speak the way their gender is supposed to speak. These words and actions can have lasting effects on someone and cause serious self-doubt throughout the rest of their lives. Often, it causes a lifelong struggle for acceptance and a mistrust of others. The reality is that gender compromises so many disparate ideas and identities, and humans are diverse in every imaginable way. To reduce this down to binary this or that is a dangerous oversimplification. A few examples of how the gender binary can restrict all of us. For men or people perceived as male, they're supposed to benefit the most from this patriarchy. Yet the gender binary does have harmful effects on the health of people perceived as male through the toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity refers to the socialization of men to be difficult or unable to express themselves emotionally in nonviolent ways. This leads to disconnection in family, society, and self. For women or people perceived as women, there are a huge amount of ways they're affected by restrictions of the gender binary. There's intimate partner violence. 9 in 10 victims of this are women. Women face hypersexualization and disempowered sex roles. Hypersexualizing representations of femininity dehumanizes female-presenting people and treating her as a sexual object and underemphasizing her needs, desires, and pleasure. This reduces respect for female-presenting people and diminishes expectations of her intellect. Women also face impossible, unhealthy, debilitating, and expensive expectations of feminine beauty. The gender binary also defines femininity in terms of nurturing others. This includes raising children, maintaining relationships, and supporting friends in emotional crisis. This work is endless, and the emotional labor women are forced to undertake for their friends and family is incredibly rough on their mental health. Women also have reduced economic opportunities. Being intelligent and strong is classified as a masculine trait, while femininity is defined by frivolous, fun, and weak. Feminine-presenting people are shamed for succeeding in school or sports. In turn, this reduces a person's economic viability and increases their dependence on relationships with people who express masculinity. Women also face internalized gender inferiority. When everyday microaggressions tell you that your gender is weaker, less competent, and in needing protecting, then you start to internalize that. It impacts your confidence in your knowledge and experiences and introduces doubt and anxiety into your self-image. For non-binary people who fall outside the gender binary, the list is ongoing of all the damage the gender binary does to the non-binary community. They face gender policing at critical development stages of their childhood, a lack of self-identity, social isolation, internalized sexism and homophobia, restricted access to education and mentorship, severe lack of economic opportunities, physical harm in a medical office. Many non-binary people are verbally harassed in a doctor's office because of a lack of understanding or malice towards their gender identity. They can also face physical harm from their peers or strangers who don't understand their identity, and they often face homelessness and poverty. Due to employment discrimination and push out from education systems, non-binary people experience high rates of poverty. Additionally, housing discrimination happens routinely and in some states is still legal. About 1 in every 5 transgender or non-binary person has experienced homelessness. The gender binary harms everyone by limiting their individual expression and liberties. Over time, these limitations on liberty and safety have a drastic impact on a person's health. Most impacted are those who fall outside of rigidly defined gender roles. The next most impacted are those who fall into the disadvantaged side of the gender binary. All binaries have a losing side, and in the case of the gender binary, it is the feminine presenting side. Lastly, the gender binary hurts masculine presenting people also. This population struggles with health issues specific to the expectation of power over and rugged individualism. Non-binary people break and defy gender norms every day just by existing as their authentic selves. They constantly rebel against gender roles and expectations by not conforming to the gender binary and society's ideas of gender. Non-binary people challenge binary social constructions of gender by identifying as outside this enforced binary. Those who are gender non-conforming defy gender norms and make a conscious choice every day to do so. People may describe themselves as gender nonconforming if they don't conform to the gender expression, presentation, behaviors, roles, or expectations that society sees as the norm for their gender. People of any gender, not just non-binary people, can be gender nonconforming. Gender roles and expectations for gender nonconformity. Gender roles and expectations for gender conformity contribute to discrimination and even violence against gender nonconforming people. There are many structures, institutions, and beliefs that try to keep people in neat, separate categories based on their gender assigned at birth. When someone breaks out of the box, they are often met with harassment that is designed to force them to conform. Gender roles limit what any person can do, and they reduce a person's life to what they should do. It forces people to perform what is expected of them, rather than live authentically as who they feel they are. Being non-binary does not mean not ever performing gender in typical ways. Many non-binary people have more feminine or masculine presentations, while others prefer a gender-neutral appearance. Appearing feminine or masculine does not, however, cancel out their identity as non-binary. This is an example of cisgender privilege. A cisgender person can make more neutral appearance choices without having their gender identity dismissed, but a non-binary person often faces comments as, "Oh, if you prefer dresses and skirts, why aren't you a woman?" The non-binary identity is an unabashedly political identity. It is for anyone who wishes to wield self-understanding in part towards dismantling a gender system that strictly controls what we can do and be. This gender system rewards those who conform to the binary gender expectation and punishes and polices those who do not. To be non-binary is to set one's existence in opposition to the system at its core. While feminism questions the unequal value placed on femininity and masculinity, highlighting the resulting gender inequalities, the non-binary movement questions why we insist on these categories at all. Challenging these categories in part by revealing the false but insistent assumption that everyone fits within them threatens those who wish to preserve social control over gendered bodies, especially control that systematically favors males who conform to dominant masculine norms. We actually saw this image in the Module 6 lecture, but I thought it was a great one to explain. Gender identity versus gender presentation. Gender identity does not equal presentation. You can identify as a man and express yourself through feminine clothing, and it does not change the fact that you're a man. Clothing does not equal gender. Gender identity cannot be assumed based on appearance, anatomy, social norms, or stereotypes. Gender identity refers to a person's internal, held sense of their own gender. A person's sense of gender identity is separate from their sexuality as well as their gender expression. This is each person's internal and an individual experience of gender. It's a person's sense of being a woman, a man, both, neither, anywhere along the gender spectrum. A person's gender identity may be the same as or different from their birth-assigned sex. Gender expression refers to how a person communicates their gender through appearance, mannerisms, and clothing. This may be a way to express sexuality or gender identity, but gender expression is not necessarily a reflection of gender identity. This expression is how a person publicly expresses or presents their gender. This can include behavior and outward appearance. A person's chosen name and pronouns are also common ways of expressing gender. Others perceive a person's gender through these attributes. It's an important concept when it comes to self-identity. Feeling confident and comfortable with how one expresses their gender is closely related to mental health and well-being. While some people express their gender in the same manner every day, others might change how they express themselves over time. Often the change can be based on different circumstances. It's very important to point out how somebody presents their gender does not determine what gender they identify with. Many people might try to hide their gender expression out of fear of negative responses or discrimination, both of which can have a major impact on mental health. In fact, many transgender and non-binary mental health issues stem from the worry or backlash of gender expression. Being non-binary is an incredibly individualized experience. No two people will experience their gender identity the same way, so what one person who identifies as non-binary may be comfortable with, another person who identifies the same way may not. The umbrella term of non-binary is great because so many identities and expressions can exist within its definition, and it covers all gender identities outside the gender binary. The non-binary experience, for many, is a great way to explore gender nonconformity and expose yourself to all the ways gender can exist within your body. There is a wider, more flexible range of gender identity and or expression than typically associated with the binary gender system. Because non-binary includes anyone that doesn't fit the traditional narrative of male or female, non-binary communities are incredibly diverse. Non-binary people may identify as both male and female, or neither male nor female. They may feel their gender is fluid, can change and fluctuate, or perhaps they permanently don't identify with one particular gender. The range of language and labels used within non-binary communities means that non-binary has become an inclusive umbrella term. No two non-binary people have the same experience with their gender, so make sure to ask questions about pronouns and how you should refer to them. The videos here, which again I will link instead of playing, show a sampling of how some non-binary people describe and feel about their gender identity. Thank you for listening and watching my presentation. I hope this gave you more of an idea about how non-binary people break outside gender roles and expectations, and how the gender binary hurts both cisgender and non-cisgender individuals alike. A few things I'd like you to take away from this presentation. You don't have to understand what it means for someone to be non-binary to respect them. Some people won't understand a lot about non-binary genders or have trouble getting them, and that's okay, but identities that some people don't understand still deserve your respect. Use the name of a person asks you to. This is one of the most critical aspects of being respectful to a non-binary person, as the name you may have been using may not reflect their gender identity. Don't ask someone what their old name was, and don't dead name them. Try not to make any assumptions about people's gender. You can't tell if someone is non-binary simply by looking at them, just like how you can't tell if someone is transgender just by how they look. Gender identity does not equal gender expression. If you're not sure what pronoun someone uses, ask. Different non-binary people may use different pronouns. Many non-binary people will use they, while others might use he or she, or even other pronouns. Asking whether someone should be referred to by certain pronouns may feel uncomfortable to ask, but it'll get easier with time, and it is one of the simplest and most important ways to show respect for their identity. Advocate for non-binary friendly policies. It's important for non-binary people to be able to live, dress, and have their gender respected at work or school and in public spaces. Talk to non-binary people to learn more about who they are. There's no one way to be non-binary. Gender identity is an individual experience that's different for everyone. The best way to understand what it's like to be non-binary is to talk with non-binary people and listen to their stories. Listed here, I have all the references I used for this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me if I can send a specific link directly to you. If you have any questions you have about this presentation, or any questions you have for me specifically about the non-binary experience, please feel more than welcome to reach out to me via Canvas email, and I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you again for listening to my presentation.